Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us here this evening. My name is Nikki Hayden, and I'm the president of the LGBTI Society here at the University of Westminster. Welcome to tonight's event to mark the beginning of LGBT History Month. Tonight's event is what it takes to be LGBTI. LGBT History Month is a month-long annual observance of lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender history and the history of gay rights and related civil rights movement. So tonight we are delighted to be joined by a diverse panel of Westminster alumni to discuss various issues concerning not only the LGBTI community but also society in general. So tonight's themes for discussion are identity and coming out, discrimination and stereotypes, relationships, university experience and beyond, and advice and guidance. During these themes, we will be displaying some facts on the screen. As the audience, you will have the opportunity to ask any questions, share your experiences, or make any comments as we progress throughout the night. We want this to be an educational event, but if you're not comfortable asking a question or think it may be too personal, you can speak to any of the panelists one-on-one during the networking event over food and drink. So let's begin. So identity and coming out. I would like each of the panelists, please, to introduce yourself, your full name, your graduation year of course, and your LGBTI identity. So, Jamie?
Hi, I'm Jamie. I graduated 3-4 years ago. Looks like I did radio production, and I'm gay, white, cis. Is that right?
Yeah.
Cool.
Hi, I'm Charlie. I graduated the summer of 2017, so literally last year. I also studied radio production, and I am a bisexual white cis woman.
And we work together again. Yeah, I'm the other voice center.
Hi, my name is Shane. I graduated from Westminster in 2012. So, yeah, 6 years ago now. Seems a lot shorter than that. I get sometimes lost in the terminology or something. But I identify myself as a gay black male, cis, as I believe it's called. That's myself.
Hi, my name is Alec. I am Intersex and I graduated this July in law.
Great. So to complete the panel will be myself. So alongside being the president of the LGBTI Society, I'm a full-time student here still, studying psychology in my final year, and I identify as a transgender woman. So let's kick off some questions. I'll start with Anik. So you identify as intersex. Could you please explain to us what that means and how did you come out as intersex?
Okay, so just a quick raise of hands. Has anyone heard the word intersex before this event? I am very happy with that. So just in case you didn't see people on the podcast, there are quite a lot of people who have put their hands up. Now, growing up, I had no idea that intersex was the right word to use because there is a lot of terminology. Intersex itself is an umbrella term, and what it means is your body doesn't fit into what you expect a male or female to look like. So in some circumstances, you can be born with both female and male genitalia, or in some circumstances, you can be completely male in terms of your chromosomes, but your body doesn't appear that way, or vice versa. Coming out as intersex, well, my parents kind of knew when I was born because it looked different down there. So I never really had to come out to my family as such, which is a great thing, I think. So when I was born, it looked completely different down there, and the doctors didn't know whether I was male or female. So what they had to do was then test my genetics and my chromosomes to say okay, is this a male or a female? When they found out that it was XY, the whole story then changed to, okay, we need to make this person more male. It needs to be normalized. That's the word they used, and that's the word they used to use from the They were called normalizing surgeries whenever someone like myself was born with genitals that didn't match what they would expect a typical male or typical female to look like. So it wasn't something that my parents didn't know. Maybe they didn't know the word was intersex, because sometimes it's referred to as DSD, which is difference of sex development. And there are so many different terms within the umbrella term intersex, so hypospadias being one of them. There's so much science and medicine involved that a lot of people will grow up knowing their medical term, but they won't know that actually it counts as being intersex.
And what about the rest of your family?
I came out, as it were, to my family maybe in 2015, and the reason I did so was I spent 21 years of having surgeries, and no one had any idea besides my parents and probably a few hundred doctors. It's like a really weird situation where you've got this really big secret that you share with a few hundred people, and you don't know who they are. I actually have, one of the fun things about being intersex is you have no idea how many people have seen your genitals. So by the time I was 21, I'd had so many surgeries and so many different experiences, but I'd never talk about it. And there's a whole secrecy and shame about being born with anything when you're different. But especially for intersex conditions where it affects your genitals, they're known as your private parts. So generally you wouldn't just bring up a conversation and go, hey, guess what I've got down here? It's not something you do. So for me, when I turned 21 and found out that actually there's nothing wrong with me, I was just born with a variation that's different, I then decided that it's time the rest of my friends and family, my cousins, they all found out. So I sat them down and I told them, so you know I've been in hospital sometimes, and they're like, yeah, you've had so many appendixes out, haven't you? Yeah, actually this is what it is. And I was really overwhelmed by the response I got, because when you grow up feeling different, you think that once people find out about what makes you different, the world is going to end, and you think that you won't be accepted. And for me to feel like that about my own family and friends made me always feel like I was hiding who I really was. So for me to come out and then find all this support, and how come we didn't know, and there's nothing to be ashamed of, that was when I started deciding, okay, maybe it's time to tell other people as well.
Yeah, so you recently featured in a BuzzFeed article discussing your experience as an intersex individual, and were featured in a video interview, which I want to play to the audience now.
I was born with partial androgen insensitivity syndrome, so what that meant was my body didn't look how normal boys should look. Intersex is an umbrella term, and if you think of sex as a spectrum, you've got XY on one side and XX on the other. Intersex is all of the things that happen in between. Growing up with an intersex condition means repeated trips to the hospital. It means going through different surgeries, not exactly knowing what those surgeries mean because you're quite young when they happen. As a child, I went through various surgeries. I was born with what they call ambiguous genitalia. The focus after finding out that my chromosomes are XY were to make my genitalia appear more male. Growing up intersex and having to keep that secret has been probably the most difficult thing about my life. Telling everyone else and kind of coming out, as it were, allowed me to be more free, and it made me more confident. It made me feel like there was nothing to hide anymore and I could do what I wanted. What I want to do is start a conversation so that people feel comfortable saying, okay, this is what's happening in my life and I want some support from other people, or I want to grow up feeling confident about myself and go through sex education or go through science or something and learn that my body isn't unnatural or weird, it's just what happens sometimes.
So, what made you to decide to become a visible intersex person? And more importantly, how do you feel the rest of the LGBTI community treated you in becoming more visible?
It's been an overwhelmingly great response from people because they're willing to listen, and for a lot of people they've never had it before, they don't know it exists. I mean, I say this quite often, but if you find out one of your friends is pregnant or someone's had a baby, the first question people usually ask is it a boy or a girl? Now, if your intersex trait is visible beforehand, when you are born, then the doctors will work with the parents sometimes to assign a gender which is most appropriate. So that means you could be XY, but downstairs you look more female, so they assign you as being female. So imagine if you're a parent who's never had intersex before, and then suddenly you have a child that is intersex, and now you have to raise them to be a girl, to be a woman, but you know that their chromosomes are XY. There's no support out there. There's not a lot of people in my position who have been speaking about all of the different ways you can be intersex, because there are so many different kinds of ways to be intersex. My story isn't very typical. There are some people who find out in their teenage years that they're actually intersex, and it's, imagine going through your whole life up until 15 or 16, and then suddenly finding out your chromosomes are different, or this is why you don't get periods or anything like that. So for me, being visible is about teaching other people that we exist, and it's about making other intersex people feel like they can come out too if they choose to. And hopefully that will trickle down to families and other people also being able to support intersex people better. Because I grew up very angry with the world and very angry with my parents and my family, because even though it wasn't their fault, I felt like they never understood anything. But the reason they don't understand anything is because we don't talk about it. So that's why I decided to become visible.
And I think that's wonderful. I really do. So I'd like to hear about the rest of the panel's experience of coming out and what that experience was like. So would you like to start?
Yeah, so my sort of story of coming out is just probably more of a recent one in terms of coming out more visibly, more publicly. So, I mean, as I'm sure all of the panelists here can sympathise with or familiar with, I sort of knew that I was gay or had feelings towards the same sex from quite at a very early age. It's only probably been in the last year where I've probably confronted those feelings directly with my parents, which has been, it's caused some difficulty. Both of my parents are from a Jamaican heritage. And Jamaica, I think, sometimes unfairly is billed as a very homophobic country. I think there are parts of it which are a lot more tolerant than the media would have some people believe, and there are some parts that are still quite violently homophobic, with quite deeply entrenched, religious, and quite old school, if you could put them, quite very outdated views. So I think my sort of experience of coming out has been sort of tainted with those sort of feelings against me, or those feelings have directed how family members have reacted towards me, which has been difficult. But I think what's helped, first of all, is London, I feel, is a great city to be gay. I think London is a wonderful city to be able to express yourself in. I think it's a great environment to be able to feel comfortable with who you are and what you believe in. So I think some of those experiences and the communities I've been involved in since I've come out and along that process have helped hugely in dealing with some of the more backward thoughts towards my sexuality.
So basically, with being bi, it's a case of I feel like I'm always forced to come out every time I'm seen with someone of a new sex, if that makes sense. So throughout my teen years, I, for the majority, kind of dated men, and I had come out as bi told my family when I was 18. But then when I started to talk about women I was interested in, my family were like, oh, so you're straight? And I had to be like, no, that's not how this works. And the next time I spoke about man again, they'd be like, yeah, it's just a lot of repeatedly coming out, which is annoying, but that's part of being bi, I guess, because a lot of people don't understand that it's really fluid. And yeah, it's just annoying because there's not one moment that you can say, oh, I came out then. There's still people today, despite the fact that I realised I was bi when I was 14, there are still people today that I still have to come out to, which is annoying, but through everything I do and the people I talk to, that's a want to change.
Jamie?
Yeah, I feel like I'm probably part of the bi-erasure problem that Charlie faced, and the fact that I came out with bi first, because I thought that was like some nice stepping stone, and I realised that actually it was just gay. But I hated being gay, and that's why it took me so long to get to that. Like, I really struggled with it, I really struggled with it, and that caused a lot of problems with my mental health when I was sort of kind of 14, 15, and had a bit of a light bulb moment where I realised that actually it was okay, and it was hugely, I always described it as like a cloud lifting with my kind of mental health, and I was so much better for it. And then I guess after that, I kind of was like, that was really rubbish. I don't want anyone else to go through that, and I kind of quite quickly got involved in kind of activism and stuff, and I guess that's why I still do it and do stuff like this now. I think stories are pretty powerful and it's a pretty cool story.
Yeah. So my own experience of coming out as transgender, my parents always knew. I was until around 5 years old, and then I started going to school, and I was being bullied by other children and had comments directed towards me by their parents. So because of that, my parents essentially forced me to boy going to school. I always knew, though, from my earliest memory, when I was around 8 or 9 years old, I had a huge stroke and refused to get my hair cut any longer. And that was like my defining moment. But I didn't fully socially transition until I was 16. And it was a few days after finishing my GCSEs, where I socially transitioned. I literally went out and brought everything that I wanted to and just started living a life that I felt more comfortable in. And from there, it was more of a medical transition, which is quite long and complicated, and I'm sure we'll discuss it a little bit later. My parents, it wasn't a shock, although my father wasn't very happy, and my parents made me homeless when I told them that I wanted to start hormones. And that was difficult. I was 18 at the time. But now, my relationship with both my parents is great, it's fine. And my brother and my two sisters are very supportive, as well as the rest of my family too. So, yes, I feel lucky in that my experience of coming out as trans within my family has been a more positive one than what other people's has. So I'm grateful for that. But I also feel like, and I'm sure the rest of you guys do, there isn't really just one like coming out story, and you don't just come out once. The first coming out feels like a relief, but then you come out regularly every single day. I mean, I don't come out every single day.
I don't get me shit.
But it's definitely not one set moment, and there are lots of different experiences and reactions. Does anyone in the audience have any questions, or would they like to share their coming out experience? Have any questions for the panelists about coming out experience? Shall we move on?
I've got one.
Oh,
It's not really a directed at panelists. Why did you leave out the Q out of the oh? I'm scared of this thing. Why did you leave out the Q in the LGBTIQI acronym?
good question. The LGBTI Society, that's currently our name. We have discussed changing it to be more inclusive. We are, I believe, still only the student union, the only student union in the country that includes intersex. The majority is LGBTI+. There is also the question of how many should we include, and what does Q mean? Does it mean queer? Does it mean questioning? And that's why. But along with my committee, we have discussed changing it to the LGBTI+ society, just to try and be more inclusive. But there are lots of different identities, sexual identities and gender identities that we don't include within our name.
And I remember being the constitution change when we added the I. And that was that idea. But it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think you mentioned there about queer as well, and queer is such a political word as well. So sometimes I identify as queer because politically, I think that's a cooler thing to do, but really gay probably isn't it? Yeah.
I think a lot of organisations stop after the T, which really irritates me a lot of the time because there's an event coming up and they've asked me to be a part of it, and they said, we're changing our name to LGBTQ. And I was like, you do realise there's only kind of like 2 letters left, why are you mixing them up? And they said, it's a bit long, don't you think? And I was like, oh, okay, then I won't be involved then, it's fine. And I think it takes time for people to realise that you need to stop excluding people from the acronym. You can't just end it after one. And I think a lot of people still feel like, oh, someone said to me in my family, but why is I even in that LGBT thing? Because it's got nothing to do with sexuality. And I was like, what has trans got to do with sexuality? Trans isn't exactly completely to do with sexuality either. And they're like, oh, yeah, good point. People just don't know what to say. And I think it is ignorant. People just leave it out.
Yeah, sometimes people don't want to be included in the LGB because they say it's a gender identity, not a sexual identity. We have considered essentially changing our name completely and not being the LGBTI Society, being something like
taking name suggestions
the Pride Society or the Rainbow Club or something similar.
Taking unicorns.
Unicorns and glitter with your So yeah, but it definitely gives us consideration. So thank you for your question.
Can I just say, I think in an ideal world, we wouldn't, and I think it's probably resonant of the stories that we've all had in them coming out, I'm sure what the audience can say as well. In an ideal world, I don't think we need these categories, or we wouldn't need to come out. So I think as soon as you start to create categories, you start to pigeonhole people and feel that they've got to sort of ascribe to a certain way society views them. So I feel like in an ideal world, maybe, I don't know, I wouldn't suggest we do away with it all entirely, but in an ideal world, we wouldn't need to come out, we wouldn't need to say, I don't know if that makes sense, or, yeah.
It definitely does, but I also think identifying with others is part of the whole aspect of being and living in yourself. So yeah, in an ideal world, I don't think such a thing would exist, and everyone would be accepted just for who they are.
Yeah, I think also when you think about the Q, as you mentioned earlier, for some people the word queer is still not something they're very happy to use, and they find it a very charged word that they don't want to hear. They think of it as an offensive term. I actually decided to come out because in Australia, where I was studying on my year abroad, their LGBTIQ society was called the Queer Society. And for them, queer is not a term to be afraid of or ashamed of. They see it as the inclusive term for everything. And when I got here, I was told that the Q actually was questioning. And I was like, oh, okay. Since when? I guess it just depends where you're from and how you feel about particular words, because some people don't like the word at all, and some people will happily use it as their political word or something.
Yeah. I mean, personally, I don't identify for it. But anyway, we have to move on, unfortunately, but thank you for your question. So the next thing is discrimination and stereotypes. So let me start with Shane. As a gay black male, what, if any, discrimination have you faced? You also played football for Stonewall SC, an all-gay team. Do you feel like you were treated differently there?
I'll start with Stonewall. I joined Stonewall quite late in the evolution of the football club. They've had quite a lot of publicity recently. I don't play for them anymore, but they're doing really well. And in terms of flying the flag, I think for a lot of gay footballers, amateur footballers, they're the best in the country and the world at what they do. I think in the early days of when Stonewall started, which was like the early 1990s, they faced a lot of homophobia from teams. Not only because football, I think, is quite tribally, historically quite a homophobic sport, but also because we were good at what we do and we still are. Last season they were runners up in the Middlesex County Division, which is a couple of the FA, the Football Association, have a pyramid of football leagues, and the Middlesex County League is a few divisions below semi-pro, which is a good level for any team to be playing at. So I think a lot of the abuse that Stonewall faced in the early days was because we were in a lot of the abuse that we have still experienced in the past few seasons that I have played has been because we were able to give the teams who we play against a decent match. We played our place with really good teams, I think, and I feel that it's only good that I think it takes initiative, it takes a lot of bravery, as a lot of players who have played for Stonewall in the past have experienced, that they've taken a lot of abuse for Stonewall to be where they're at now. In terms of the discrimination that I face, I would say discrimination in the gay community is probably quite, how can I phrase it? It isn't as in your face. I think the community is quite, not marginalised, but can be quite sectioned in the terms that I feel that there are, for example, I feel our Compton Street isn't very inclusive of the community in the country. I don't think there's a lot of places where young being gay people can go to socialise, which I think is quite unfair. Not as much as they can for our white counterparts. I think there are quite a lot of stereotypes in the gay community. The amount of times before I had a party, I've been on Grindr and people automatically ask me if I've got a big black cock, for example, or let's say you're bluntly, but come up with these stereotypes which you feel you kind of it's a bit of an irony because you're in a community which is facing discrimination every day, but yet still can discriminate inadvertently. So yeah, that's something which
I feel like a lot of people within this community frame discrimination as preference instead. So they say, actually, I'm not being discriminatory, this is just what I prefer. If you get what I mean.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I just want to play a short video before moving the discussion on. So, Hannah, have you faced any discrimination or stereotyping? What stereotypes do you think exist in society that are untrue or unfounded or just generally piss you off?
What pisses me off is that there is no intersex representation in even things like that. So yeah, that pisses me off. Also, there's a lot of things that piss me off, if you know me, you know that.
Was that Stonewall? Was that Stonewall video? Stonewall only recently kind of acknowledged the T.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and that took up, even though the T helped start.
Yeah, I was speaking to
rights,
someone from Stonewall and they said to me, we've only just managed to get the T involved, I think you'll have to wait a little while for us to consider the I. And I was like, oh, didn't realise it was a competition, but okay. And yeah, so discrimination, I feel like intersex people aren't covered under the Equality Act in England and Wales. Around the world, there's a lot of places where intersex just doesn't seem to exist in legislation. And what that means is, compared to trans people who may fight to get surgeries, intersex people are just given surgeries without people considering do they actually want them or not. So that's one of the issues I think is probably quite prevalent because of the fact that by ignoring the fact that intersex exists, that counts as discrimination to me. And as for stereotypes, people are pretty intrigued by intersex genitals. I've known that my whole life. So I think one of my earliest memories must have been a bunch of student doctors coming in to have a look. And at the time, I didn't realise what was so special because this was just my body. This is how I thought other people looked as well. But growing up, I then started realising that stereotypically, my body isn't like other guys, and it isn't like other girls either, so there's something different. And it became something that was very part of a normal experience for me growing up, every 6 months going to a hospital and having loads of brand new people looking at what I have done there. Like, I can't give you a number of how many people have seen me naked. I had a major surgery in 2016, and for that, they took skin from my forearm to, I'd say, recreate my penis, but I kind of didn't have one, so create a penis and everything. And 2 weeks following that surgery, I was in hospital, and 237 to 257 people came to see. And that was different doctors, different med students, nurses, healthcare workers. So for the first few days I was on a lot of morphine, so I was just showing people anyway. I was like, look what I've got now. But after a while it was kind of just people coming to have a look because it was new and exciting for them.
And Charlie?
I think the biggest issue regarding discrimination for white people is that so many LGBT reports focus on the L and the G. It's always very gay couples. Everything is gay couples say this, gay people say that. And what they're referring to are people who appear in a same-sex couple. And that could mean that one of those people is bi. And by saying a gay couple, you're immediately erasing that white person's identity, which is awful and horrid and such. It's just not nice to have a whole part of you erased completely. And then there's the whole thing of a lot of people are like, oh, don't date a bi person, they're just going to run off with the gender, they're going to cheat on you, they just want both constantly, they just want everyone at the same time. That's so wrong. And personally, one that I faced a lot when I was younger was people see it as a bi woman is just there for the entertainment of a man. I remember the first time I came out to one of, like, someone who's my best friend now, admittedly, but when I first came out to him, when I first met him, I said, oh, like, yeah, I'm bi, and his words were, oh, that makes you so much more attractive. And I just kind of stood there, because how do you react to that? And since, like, I've questioned him about it, and, like, he came out as by himself, so I don't know if that was a bit of an internal thing, but it's those little things, those little comments which don't seem a lot to that person, it's just a passing comment, but it's still horrible. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to have my specialisation, but I just want to add on the back of that, obviously I think I was gay, and I think it's kind of like, oh, wow. But like, that video just shows you, right, there's so many stats on there about how difficult it is to be right across the LGBT spectrum. So I was just launched this massive biometrics at work, and it's like a series of content on bio. And honestly, the comments under some of the stories are gross. I just bizarre. I just don't understand why we do it.
Why would you date a bi person? Like literally, why would you date a bi person?
Yeah, but there's so much more from that. It's just gross. But yeah, but like non-specialization, I think that's a big thing. You know, we talk about tribes and like twinks and like top and bottom shaming. It's all linked to this like toxic masculinity thing. I think like that's the thing that I'm constantly kind of thinking like it's all around those like stereotypes of what we're all supposed to be, and it's and I guess like yeah, we get wrapped up in all those stats, but there is some good out there too. Just remember that.
So in regards to my own experiences of discrimination, varies. Initially during my transition, it was verbal assaults, but I've also been physically attacked. I've also been raped, and this started, I guess, only about a year after transition, which was quite difficult to deal with. The reason actually why I decided to move to London was I was in my hometown and I was with a group of girlfriends in a gay bar, and there was a group of guys in there, and we left, and me and one girl was slightly behind the group on the way to a taxi rank, and a group of guys who were in there followed and attacked me, and they my nose, a few of my ribs. I was hurt quite a bit, and I was in hospital. I think the worst, for me, the worst thing that they did was when they knocked me out, one of them stamped on my head, and I had a footprint on my head, on my forehead, which was difficult to deal with. So yes, in regards to being trans, men making comments, I think it leads to like the toxic masculinity. A lot of men find me attractive, but only a portion feel open enough to date someone trans. So it can be a little difficult to kind of describe.
Can I ask you what your experience is in the gay community? Because I've got a lot of trans friends who wouldn't necessarily come out maybe to some of the places that I'm socialising. I've got a lot of friends of different races who wouldn't come out to some of the places. So how do you feel, what do you feel about that dynamic?
Yes, I think I get more, something what you would call transphobia. I get more hatred on the gay community than when I do the straight community. So out in Soho, I'll probably get more comments generally from gay men to say, why don't you just be a feminine gay man? And they have no understanding of that. I had no idea I was attracted to males till I was maybe 11, 12, I guess. But I knew I was already a female from Algeria. So yeah, I don't get treated best on gay feeling. And every time I go out, it's not like I always get negativity. It's just generally, I think, people on the gay community, they're on the lookout, they expect I would see someone trans. Whereas if I'm in a straight club, no one's really expecting that, so it's not, you know? Yeah, they're not expecting that. Anyway, yeah, so other discrimination, for example, I have a lung disease, and a few times in hospital I was put on a male ward. Another time I was put on a female ward, but they said I couldn't use the shower facility, so I had to use a sink for 3 days, whilst I was recovering from quite a nasty infection. I had pneumonia. So that was quite difficult. And also job discrimination is regular. I've been offered a job over the phone, and then upon attending to sign a contract, I've been told no, actually. And I'm currently going through a situation with my ex-boss who sexually assaulted me. And when the whole Me Too campaign kicked off in America, I decided that I shouldn't actually stay quiet. And I think part of that, again, is the whole toxic masculinity. I really do. Men feeling like they can do whatever they want. And this is not all men. This is just it's an unfortunate thing that men have to be men and be, that. So, we have to move on. But does anyone have any comments or any questions, or does anyone share their experiences? Oh, hold on 1 second, I think. A mic is correct.
So, only recently, I suppose, there have been laws passed in the House of Commons in Parliament that not only allows for legal same-sex marriage, but also offers more protection for members of the LGBT community. At any point, did you ever feel after this happened, because it's quite a progressive thing to happen, I think, did you ever feel like more, I suppose, protected or safer, or did you feel like this represented your identities a bit better?
Good question. I think that with the Equality Act and with the Gender Recognition Act, which protects trans individuals, it's not that great. I'll give you an example, a very quick one. So let's say I'm married to a woman, and I decide to transition from male to female. I can get a gender recognition certificate showing that I've transitioned legally, because who needs that? But I wouldn't be able to, essentially, I wouldn't be able to get a new birth certificate in a female birth certificate unless my marriage was annulled, which is unusual. Or so essentially, your partner has some kind of say in that. I believe that's still the case, even though gay marriage has now been introduced. I think there's a way to get it converted in some way from a heterosexual to a homosexual marriage. Personally, I don't feel like I'm that protected, because to be protected, you have to have people not have dicks. And unfortunately, fortunately, that's still the case. And you don't really have much faith in the police. So if I'm discriminated against, I don't even know the process, to be honest with you. How do I go about that? I can't prove that a company won't hire me because I'm trans unless I literally have physical evidence or an email stating that I wasn't hired because of that. I have my suspicions, but that's just my take on that.
It's all well and good, like a couple of people in Parliament saying, yes, let's make this law, but that's not going to change the minds of the entire public, which is essentially what we need for ultimate safety and to feel comfortable in society.
Yes, exactly.
It's the culture change that's next, isn't it, right? Which is why stuff like this is important, because it's moving those conversations forward and having it with people. I think that's what, was that kind of what you was asking about, like, is a law enough? Like, because probably not. It's like, the next thing is us all going out there and telling our stories. It's like, Martin Luther said, come out of the closet and tell your families, and that stuff's still really important. Going out, it
needs to trickle down, doesn't it? Legislation needs to trickle down to through culture and things. So, was there another question?
Hi, Nick. In terms of your surgeries, at what age did you have a decision in doctors and people viewing your body?
So surgeries started literally when I was 4 months old. So from 4 months is when I started having surgeries. And I, in myself, was quite mature young person. So from the age of 10 to 13 is when the doctor started asking me on my opinion, for my opinion on certain matters, like, do you want to have this surgery? But at the same time, I felt like I live in a society where if I didn't have the surgery, what would be my option? So it took me a long time, even after I'd had the surgery, to accept that I had made that decision myself, if that makes any sense. I think when I was 10, I was too young to consent to being put on hormones, but I was put on hormones. And a lot of the time, my parents consented to surgeries because the doctors told them that it was the right thing to do, and that my life would be over if I didn't have these particular surgeries, whichever ones they were. We didn't know at the time, they were all just trying out different things to see what would happen. Because when doctors do these surgeries, they're not evil, they're doing things to try and make things better for you. So the way I was brought up to see all surgeries is that they're trying to make you better. And when they say things like that, it makes you think that there is something wrong with you in the first place, that needs to be corrected, that needs to be fixed. And it took me a very long time to realise that all of these surgeries I've had were purely cosmetic, and that my body would have been completely fine had I not had any of these surgeries. So that took a lot of getting used to as well.
Does anyone have any other questions or would like to share their experiences? Or no?
I have a question for you. As you are intersex, what was your experience in dating and relationships?
We do have an experience in relationships, so you'll find out in a second. Another question over here. If it was dating, was it dating? Yeah. Okay, it doesn't. Any other questions not related to dating or relationships? Why do you kind of guess? Okay, this will be the last question before we move on to drastically out of time.
So this is a question for Nikki. So when you were growing up, you said that you noticed there was always sort of something, you always been dealing with different sort of people around you. What was your experience with sort of the NHS and the mental health care when you tried to approach sort of go towards transitioning? And do you think changes need to be made in the system and the approach towards young trans people and heading towards transition?
Good question. When I was 16, I went to my GP and told him that I was trans and I wanted to go to a gender clinic. And he laughed at me and said, "Oh, you're a silly young man," I think he called me, which really helped my confidence. And he literally just like shooed me out of his office. When I was around 18, my respiratory consultant tried to refer me to a sexologist. Apparently people go there and they have issues with having sex. So I knew straight away that it was the wrong place for me. So I then finally went back to my GP, spoke to someone else and got referred to the gender clinic in my local area. It took around 18 months, I think, a year to 18 months to be referred, and then I went through the process of assessment essentially. I've been in an unusual situation because last year I did a placement for my psychology degree at a gender clinic for children. It's called the Tavistock Centre, GIS, Gender Identity Development Service. And waiting lists are through the roof for people to see specialists in gender identity. I believe the longest wait for a clinic now is 2 years, and yet the NHS waiting time, I believe, is a maximum of 16 weeks. And Theresa, I believe it was Theresa May said, "Oh yeah, well that doesn't account. That's not for gender services, even though gender services are part of the NHS." And yes, she was quickly shot down by the Department of Health, who said, "Actually, no. The waiting list should be 16 weeks."
That's very dangerous even for a trans person, because if you are about to go through puberty and you have to wait 2 years for any kind of treatment, essentially you're going to get sex characteristics that you don't want, that you don't believe that you should have.
Definitely, and there's not a lot of specialists in this area, and because of that, there's a huge waiting list. But I need to be careful about what I say now. whilst working at the clinic, there was a situation that we came across with a private GP who prescribed cross-sex hormones to a trans individual, and they were not a specialist in this area of health, and there was consequences because of that. The transgender man grew too tall too quickly, which has made their bones susceptible, and it's likely that he'll need new hips at 35 because he grew so tall. So there also needs to be regulation around private doctors treating trans people.
Whenever I hear about trans stories, I always find it so amazing how we've got one area, one group of people wanting to have surgeries and treatment, and then on the other side you've got a lot of intersex people who didn't even necessarily have a choice on what surgeries were done to them, and they're arguing for body autonomy. And it's like, where is the balance there? On one side, you've got someone who wants to have surgery and they're not getting it. On the other side, you've got people who don't want surgery but are forced into it.
Yeah, definitely. So we have to move on now because so our third thing, relationships. So to all the speakers, how have your relationships been with your family and your friends since coming out, and then move on to partners and kind of aspect. So Jenny, would you like to start your relationship with your family and friends? Did that change when you came out?
Yeah, I think both of them were very scared when I came out that I was going to, go and dilate. Like, that was a genuine fear, and they were worried that I'd get bullied and all of those things, all of those stats that you saw, right? So Dad went and bought a load of books and read it because I found books with them very quickly. I got over it. Mum took a long time, but eventually started to say things like, when you get married, when you have kids, and talk about future husbands and stuff. And that all kind of happened quite accidentally. That was quite empowering. So yeah, a couple of different days ago, my parents, I guess, and my brother just went. I think he went cool.
Did you lose any friendships ever coming out?
No, I think I was very lucky at school, and I also think that I was lucky at school because a couple of people had already come out of my year group. So if anything, I took the brunt of it, and I drove the wave for them to improve through. So thank you for that.
And Charlie?
I think my parents, their language wasn't the best at first, but I think over the years, as I kind of forcefully educated them on how to say things, it got better. A lot of my siblings were kind of too young to understand when I first came out, but when I came out to my brother, his reaction was, "So is this why you let him share it so much?" I mean, maybe. But yeah, and he was lovely and really supportive, and he has, as much as I learned on him, he's also learned on me, because a few years ago, he came out to me as trans, and in recent years, I've been helping him also learn and also educate our family about trans issues as well. So at this point, I feel like my entire family is just a bit it doesn't really matter what's going on, we've got everything going on, they're all really, really cool. Again, with my friends, their language wasn't the best at first. I educated them, but at this point, most of the circles that I'm in have either done work with the LGBT community or are the LGBT community, so they're amazing.
Yeah, you both work in...
Both work at external services. We're LGBTI 24 hours.
So we can't really do it. Obviously, you have no issues with being out and proud in the workplace.
We have a problem with the other way around.
So Michelle, what about your common experience in regards to friendships and extended family, because we have our first?
My personal relationships have totally changed. I would say from when I was in school and college and university, and those are now completely different. I mean, it was quite difficult because when I was in school, I was into all the sort of things stereotypically boys were into. I played football, so it was having that dynamic and then trying to balance that as well with being gay or having feelings towards me. Within the circles that I used to socialise in, were quite difficult. So those personal relationships have changed. My family relationships are good. I remember telling my cousin who was, her initial response was that she couldn't believe I hadn't told her sooner, which was nice for her to say that. I had a girlfriend at the time that I came out as well. And it was difficult trying to sustain a relationship, or a platonic relationship with her as a friend after I'd come out to her. That didn't last too long, which was quite difficult. But I would say that the relationships which I have now, I feel are a lot more genuine. I feel people will sort of, the people I know now are similar to me in more ways than one. I have a lot of friends who share the same cultural interests in terms of music, food, and are gay as well, which isn't something which I was aware existed when I was 15, 16, 17. I didn't know that I could go to a club and dance to Beyonce as a gay man freely without anybody looking at me. Like, you know what I mean? Like I was different. So it's nice that I can do that. I can do that now. I can do that more openly. And I have those connections to be able to do that.
Let's get some on there.
So Anna, we've heard a lot about your relationships changing with friends, family. What about dating specifically?
Okay, so this is always an awkward conversation for me and with me.
Well, I need to talk about it.
No, I will. So, growing up, knowing that my body looks different down there, I always avoided dating. So I always avoided dating other people because I was intersex. And then one day I realized, wait a minute, no one knows I'm intersex, so how come all these other people are avoiding dating me? I haven't figured that out yet. But, so I kept it a secret for a long time. It was within my family, my parents knew, my brother and sister. They were always more concerned with me finding anyone who liked me for me, rather than needing to worry about my genitals. But I was always more concerned about the fact that my body looks different. So I always avoided dating. Now that I've had surgeries to make my body look more typical, I think it's something that I'm going to start exploring. Haven't figured it out yet.
Avoided.
But yeah, so for me, I think the difference was with my intersex story, I knew I was intersex from a very young age, but there are some people who don't find out they're intersex until maybe like their late teenage years. So they may appear to be female and then they don't menstruate. So then they go to a doctor and find out actually they're not chromosomically female. Now, when I've spoken to these people, they never avoided dating and they found it weird that I avoided dating. So it's not, I think, not all intersex people avoid dating, and you might even be dating someone who's intersex and you just don't know it yet.
And they might not either.
They might not either, yeah.
So my own experiences, when I came out, I did pretty much lose all of my friends, which to me wasn't that much of a big deal, because the way I see it is, if you don't want to talk to them because I'm trans, then you're not a good enough friend anyway, so good luck. With regards to dating, difficult?
I think we have the element of surprise. I think that's
it's not really good.
Until they see what's down there for us, it might be a completely different experience. And I always have that fear of what's it going to be like once they see. And I don't know if you have that or anything, but for me, that was always a big thing.
Not really. I didn't actually start dating until after I transitioned. So I think my first boyfriend, I was nearly 20. And obviously, I started my transition so early that by that point I was comfortable in my body to date. And yeah, I think living in London is a great opportunity to date. So I do date a lot. But it's hard. But it's hard but it's hard to find a serious connection, I guess.
It's not about coming out again. So when do you tell someone that actually I may not be what you think I am or who you think I am?
For me, it's really difficult in regards to being trans and coming out, and especially in regards to toxic masculinity, because I've never. Oh, actually, so just on one night when a guy asked me out in a bar, and I thought, I don't know I was trans, and he brought a drink over me. Oh, actually, no. There was 2 other occasions actually where I was physically attacked in a bar after men tried to come on to me and I said I'm not interested. And the worst one was, I just said no sorry and I turned away. He'd been trying it for a while and I was like, give up. Turned away and 5 minutes later someone told him I was trans and he ran across the bar and kicked me like that and I fell and I cut my hand on the glass that I was holding. But it's a really dangerous thing to, when it comes to tell someone that you're trans, it feels pretty scary. And that's why I actually really like online dating, like these apps, not particularly Tinder, as I said. But it gives me a space where I can say, either way, you might need to know that I happen to be transgender, if you have any issues, cool, goodbye, good luck. And generally, people don't care. I like guys. Generally don't care.
Is this something you put on your profile or do you just...
No.
Okay.
No. I used to, but now I don't. Just because I want it to be in my own time. I want it to know me a little bit before I say, by the way, trans. Like, I don't, it's not really across my forehead, so why would I say it as, hi, I'm Nikki, I'm transgender. You know? So I don't have it on. And
if I could just add, I think one of the difficulties which I faced when coming out is especially on the gay scene is separating promiscuity or hookups from dating. And I don't know if anybody's familiar with the gay scene, especially in London, can be very, very sexualised. And it is very easy just to hook up with people. And the gay scene is set up for that. You know, when you go to a concert street, you go into any night out on a Friday or Saturday night in Shoreditch or in Vauxhall, so there's people looking to hook up left, right, centre. So I think one of the major difficulties that I experienced when coming out is how do you separate the two, meeting somebody for just a chat on a Friday or Saturday night, and then sort of sustaining a relationship with them past the 3rd or 4th meetup. And I've done that now. I've got a partner who I love dearly for the past 2 years. And it's something which I feel a lot of gay men aren't prepared for, or it doesn't, and I don't think it's something that you can necessarily be prepared for until you're thrown in at the deep end. I think that is one huge difficulty, not just in the gay scene in London, but all over the world.
I always think that's a lot to do with like internalised shame that we grow up struggling with our identities, and then we get into relationships, and because we don't trust ourselves, we can't do that trust going forward. And I was wondering if that's, I'm not sure if that's something that everyone else, because internalised shame works right across the spectrum.
We do have a question at the front, so let's take that. But before that, I would like to say that I do experience people assuming that I'm just like a sex object. I didn't know how to do all that. And that's how some men can be, like, when they find out, they no longer want to date, they just want to have sex with me because I'm worth a quick shag, but nothing more. And I think that relates to toxic masculinity and not wanting other people to know.
I think a lot of the time it's also they're worried about what other people will think. So even if they really like you, well, how would I tell my parents I'm dating someone who's trans? Or how would I tell my parents or my friends that I'm dating someone who's intersex? It's an alien concept to them. For a lot of people.
I definitely face that situation because there's a thought that if I come out, it if I'm not want to use that word, if I'm open about dating a trans woman, will people think I'm gay? There's that connotation that now I'm feeling comfortable.
Yeah, I was listening actually to Shane, right? And I think that there is actually like a question that comes to my mind when I was just like hearing about online dating. So I just want to ask you guys, what do you think of application sites such as Grindr or like application where like the gay community they interchange? Do you think it's something that makes like a benefit to our community, the community? Because it seems like people they don't get into a relationship just because they seem to not trust the people that they use this application. So I just want to ask you, do you think it's something that is beneficial or is something that is just like a handicap in order to have a relationship with somebody?
Personally, I feel like all of the apps have one thing in common, which is you're able to meet a lot of people in a very short amount of time. By staying at home and sending a message, and having that availability, having such a wide pool of people that you could possibly date or have sex with.
I think a lot, and I think there's back to your previous point, we've talked about some of the experiences that you've unfortunately faced. I think a lot of the change has to come within the community itself. I agree that we need the legislative support. We need support professionals, doctors, and lawyers, and so on. But I think a lot of the change, I think one of the things that I've struggled with hugely since coming out is the irony of being involved in the community, which has fought discrimination for years and years and years, yet it's so discriminatory itself against black people, against Muslims, against transsexual people, against intersex people. I find balancing the two really, really difficult. The debates around HIV and PrEP are an example for me. Black people are disproportionately affected by HIV for various reasons, yet have disproportionately been involved, not being involved in contributing to the debates around PrEP. So I think in answer to your question, I think a lot of the change that we want to see has to come from the community ourselves, which I don't know how we'll do that. Sex is a big seller, etc. It's a big seller for attitude and so on in mainstream media, gay media, but I just feel that it's difficult for us to try and fight stereotypes when a lot of the stereotypes which are being perpetuated, the wrong minds are wrong minds on our websites.
I don't think it's even sex is just about person. If you look at a global context, things like Grindr and stuff, they're hugely liberating because they allow gay men, LGBT people to connect in places where it's impossible to do so. We're so lucky in London to have a community where we can do that. But actually, it's about exactly what you just said there. It's about taking that culture and fixing it everywhere. So we can't blame the apps. They're a great place to have a community, and we've just got to put the community values that we want into them.
Does anyone have any quick questions or comments? There's a lot.
One of the good things about the apps is it can really boost your self-confidence and make you feel better, even if you don't end up using it for what they particularly want you to use it for. So the attention is always good for some people.
So we all run out of time, but
you mentioned toxic masculinity. I've never heard that expression. The other one I heard the other day was cis trans.
Cis who? Sorry. Okay, so I'm transgender, meaning that I transitioned from male to female. Trans is an umbrella term for anyone, for transsexual, transgender. Some people use it who are non-binary or genderqueer, who don't identify with any particular gender or feel like they fluctuate between. Cisgender is essentially the absence of being trans. So if I ask the room who here is transgender, very few people, or who identifies as trans or non-binary, very few would raise their hands. However, the rest of you will be cisgender. So if you feel comfortable in the body that you were born, you're cisgender. And just a short abbreviation of that is cis. CIS, not, yeah.
And what about
toxic masculinity?
It's a really good definition for it online, but it's basically around kind of the concepts around patriarchy and feminism and stuff. So it's this idea that men are supposed to be this like masculine, manly type that delivers the family, and all of those kind of traditional roles around men and what we're supposed to be. And when we talk about toxic masculinity, that's what we mean with that concept that a man can be one thing in that traditional family role. That's toxic because actually men there's so many different types of men and we should be embracing that difference. That's kind of what we're getting at.
It's like a cage, masculinity is like a cage, and it's not only something that men put towards each other, but a lot of women will actually put men in this cage of masculinity, like mothers will put their sons in manly things to do or sporty things because they think this is how you're supposed to be. And they do it because they think if you're not like this, other people won't accept you and you're going to be bullied. So you need to behave like this way you're very good. So when you tell someone that this is what it means to be a man,
don't cry in and stuff like that, that's toxic, that's enjoyable.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, just one very quick one. When you're an intersex, could you be attracted to a man or a woman?
Yeah, sexuality is completely different. So you can be attracted to whoever you want to be attracted to. Personally, I am attracted to both, and I think I spend a lot of time, the reason I say that is because I don't judge people on what's in between their legs, and I don't want them to be the same to me. But it's not like I've chosen to be bi, I am. But yeah.
Okay, one more quick question on that subject. If you have any other questions after, you can approach us.
Hi, my name is Sergio. My question is, I hear a lot of the issues you've been talking about, and actually that even in our own community, we have a lot of questions about a lot of things and about issues. We don't understand a lot of subjects. And I think that education is very important. And I'm not sure if, in my opinion, I think that for being able to normalize the sexuality and how people feel about their bodies and sex, about how they prefer, it would need to be a good program, educated program. I'm not from this country, I'm from Spain, so I'm not sure how the education system works in this country, but I would like to ask, is the LGBT community, is it working with the government, or is it pushing for some type of education program in the current system? So there could be a subject maybe in schools where it is taught all about all of these things.
In my school, it's called citizenship and KHSE.
The government recently announced.
So last year, so last year, me and Charlie worked with an organisation called National Student Pride, which is held at this university next week. And last year we did an event on sex education, on it being LGBT inclusive. And about 4 days after the event, the government committed to bringing compulsory sex education to all schools, and having it said it's LGBT inclusive. So I think that's a really important topic, and it's an ongoing conversation between the community and the government, but I think you're very right, the government could and should do more.
I mean, I want the government to also include intersex people in that, because growing up and going through these lessons, which also greatly talked about the LGBT. I never learned about the Q or the I or the A. So the next step is not just including those people, but including everyone, and that's what I want.
And it's because those stories at a young age are really affirming. So if you hear those identities and it's something you recognise, so a lot of people, when we talk about sort of YouTubers, they say, oh, I found out something new what that is. Imagine if young people have that, it would be huge.
I mean, especially when I was learning about a normal body, and people were saying, my teacher at one point was saying things about it's common for boys to feel concerned about the size of their genitalia, and that didn't cover anything to do with intersex, and even the smallest one they showed had nothing that looked anything like mine. So I was like, again, I don't learn about things like this, no one else in my class is going to learn about it, so maybe I shouldn't be talking about it, and it just internalises even more that no one talks about it.
It's definitely about education and educating the young through legislation, which hopefully the government will soon be doing. So we have to quickly move on to university experience and beyond. So we're wondering, to the panel, did you use any support services during your time at university, or do you have any support mechanisms now?
I used the counselling service, but back then I hadn't come out as intersex, so my counsellor had no idea. And I think, looking back, if I had talked about it, maybe that would have been a good thing. I came out as intersex in my final year of university, and my lecturers were all very, very supportive and really encouraging. So they let me choose in my final assessments for each topic. So like in family law, my lecturer let me actually focus on intersex issues and the legal issues behind that. In entertainment law, I was able to cover LGBTQIA+ representation on and behind the screen. So even in disability law, every single subject I've done, once I've told the teachers that I'm intersex, this is what it is, they were very supportive about this university, and that's what I love about Westminster.
I didn't, which is a short answer, unfortunately, Nikki. And I don't really have many support mechanisms apart from friends and my partner now, to be honest. I wasn't aware of the support mechanisms at the university when I was here in 2012. I was only here for a year. But so no, I didn't. Sure.
Tom, actual answers that way.
Yeah, I also use the counselling services while in university for my mental health. I always say it's important to find your community, the LGBTI community, for support as well, because they understand it, and obviously they're always really caring and always there to help. And I didn't really find that community for me until I reached the end of my last year at university when I joined Student Pride, and everyone there's been a family for me ever since. Like, with the group, I had so much more time with them. Like, everyone's best friend, we're basically family. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say that, throughout education, I've always found my queer family. And used to do what Nikki did running the society, and I still work with Student Pride, because it's just such an awesome team. And yeah, I think that's it. Like, for me, my support is my queer family.
Yeah, before moving to London, I didn't really know anyone trans. So that was great. Moving here and meeting new people. In my first year, I joined the LGBTI Society, and then I ran as trans rep in second year, and I was a trans rep assistant because I lost out. But yes, at the beginning of the year, I was a trans rep, and then the president stepped down, so I was elected in as president. We've been trying and pushing to be more inclusive and to try and put on different events for other LGBTI people that we don't automatically consider, which is a shame, because if you don't fall within that intersectionality, so events that aren't just for alcohol, so that we can have non-alcoholic drinkers, including Muslim students who identify as LGBTI, finding accessible places for those who find it difficult to get around. And as someone who's not Muslim, someone who doesn't use a wheelchair, that's not generally the first thing on my mind. So I'm trying to be more inclusive within LGBTI society. So Jamie, you briefly mentioned National Student Pride.
Did I?
What do you do in it, and what is National Student Pride?
Cool, yeah, so I mentor the teachers team. Next week is the event. If you've enjoyed today at all, it's a whole day of this. It's about talking about our identity and our community. It was founded 13 years ago as a protest movement, essentially, to a homophobic talk on campus. And I guess it continues today in that same vein. So next week we're running a whole day of events at the Marlborough campus. We're focusing on themes around LGBT homelessness. We have a panel on Beyond the Binary, which is an entirely trans panel talking about what it means to be beyond that gender binaries. And at the end of the day, with something just to bring the mood completely up to full speed, performing acts is going to be on stage performing, and in what is bizarrely a blind dates parody, which we're calling queer dates, which is all about finding like a queer mate, really, isn't it? So there's going to be, it's a really exciting weekend, and the reason, to still do it is because, like, as you heard all night, stories are so powerful and important, and that's what our whole weekend's about. We call it like a private conversation. So I really.
We also have a Pride panel, which I'm really excited about.
And puppies coming, because there's going to be therapy dogs, because we all need that, right?
Very quickly, I found advice and guidance. So just a few comments from the panel, please. What advice could you give current students and young alumni who may be confused with their gender identity or sexuality, or they're scared about coming out in uni or in the workforce? Any advice to get?
Find someone that wants to employ you because you think exactly who you are. Like a lot of people, like 6 out of 10 graduates go back in the closet after they've left. And I had, at my last job, my boss was rubbish around here stuff. And now I'm in a place where I can 100% be that. And I'm so much happier to be at work, and that's so important. So find someone that cares and wants to hire you for 100% who you are. Don't take any exceptions.
I'd say when figuring out how you identify, don't feel like it's a rush. Like, take your time. Like, I'm probably one of the most obnoxious white people that my friends know. But like, growing up, there were still moments when I was like, am I just a lesbian? And it's just because there's such a pressure for you to pick a label and stick to it. But it's completely fine if you're like, okay, I need to take a moment to actually figure out what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
I would probably say, don't be alone. Don't be afraid to speak out or join partnerships with somebody. I think there are so many people, especially in London, who are going through similar experiences to you, have similar interests, which you're probably not aware of. I would say, don't be afraid as well to be who you are. Don't be afraid to express yourself. I'm a big believer in being who you are and standing up for who in what you believe. So I would say, don't be afraid to promote it. If that's your and don't suffer in silence.
Echoing everything that everyone's just said, also, don't be afraid to tell your story, because there are people who might want to hear it. And the more you share your story, the more you will help other people to come to terms with theirs, or even just think about things differently. So if they know someone, or they are going through something similar, they'll feel a lot more confident. And I think university is a great place to do that, because it's like its own little bubble. What you mentioned earlier about people going back into the closet once they find work, I hope that's not like that someday.
I completely agree. So before we bring the session to a close, I just want to say a huge thank you to the panel for joining us here today. And I've learned a lot, so I hope everyone else has. So yeah, thank you. We haven't completely overrun, however, we do have drinks and food at the back. We have a room for around half an hour, so get drinking and eating. If anyone does have any questions for any of the panelists, we will remain. So feel free to ask if there's any questions, or just give them a ring. Thanks, Nikki.
Do you like how we do it? Do you get there? Do you want to sit down? I like going in.
I'm going to take a picture.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Right.
Can I get in the middle?
Yeah. Right. I might take a couple just to make sure we've got it right. Hayden, just so you go, take the picture behind you. Thank you.